Keisha Thomas was 18 years old when the Ku Klux Klan came to her hometown for a protest. It seemed unusual for the KKK to come to her hometown of Ann Arbor, Michigan, a progressive, liberal, multicultural community. It seemed like an odd place for them to show up. And certainly a group of protesters were gathered together to let them know they were not particularly welcome with their message in Ann Arbor. The protesters gathered on one side of a security fence. Everything was relatively calm as police dressed in riot gear protected the Klan members. As Catherine Wynn writes in her BBC News article on October the 29th, 2013, she tells of this incident that happened and says that suddenly, out of the crowd, a woman with a megaphone screamed, "There's a Nazi among us!" People turned and noticed a white, middle-aged man with a Confederate flag t-shirt on began walking away from the group. Someone yelled, "Kill the Nazi!" And he started running, and the crowd ran after him, and they knocked him to the ground, and they began to kick him and beat him with the sticks on their placards. He seemed to be someone who was opposed to them. Whether he was supporting the KKK or not, no one knows. But certainly, his Confederate flag t-shirt gave off a message of hatred and racism, and his SS symbol tattooed on his arm seemed as if it were proclaiming white supremacy at the very least. It was a mob mentality as the man lay on the ground. The Gospel of Matthew tells us that on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. That's what Matthew says. They merely went to see the tomb. That's what they were looking for, a tomb. They went to pay their respects, much like we would go to the graveside of a loved one. However, when they arrived at the tomb, there was an earthquake. An angel of the Lord descended. The guards surrounding the tomb were so scared they were petrified and paralyzed by the appearance of the angel. But the angel said to the women, don't you love that phrase? The angel said to the women, no men, 2 women, disciples, the very first preachers on this most unique and significant event in Christendom. The first preachers were women. Delightful. The angel said to the women, do not be afraid. Go and tell the others, God has raised Jesus from the dead. So they went. They were rushing away when suddenly Jesus appeared to them and said, greetings. They recognized him, fell to their knees, grabbed his feet, and began to worship him. Again, he said to them, again, do not be afraid. Go, tell the others that I will see them in Galilee. And so they went to tell the others. We may wonder what to make of this event, but we might be better served to think about what it doesn't tell us. The first thing it does not tell us is that nobody was expecting to see a resurrection. The women went to see a tomb, not a resurrection. They were as surprised as anybody, as everybody else was surprised. The second thing it tells us, even though there was some natural phenomenon like an earthquake, the stone rolled away, the big thing was not what happened in the event itself, but the big thing was the message. God has raised Jesus from the dead. A unique event in history to this point. The third thing, it doesn't say anything about Jesus rallying the troops around and saying, okay, everybody, let's get ourselves together and let's go get rid of all those mean people that killed me. Nothing like that at all. The message, repeated twice, is go, go, go. Or as one of my favorite New Testament scholars, Bernard Brandon Scott, says, the Apostle Paul writes that no resurrection experience comes without vocation. Or to put it differently, every resurrection experience comes with vocation, a calling. The call is, go. Go love. Go live. Go. In fact, the next verses in Matthew, which we'll consider more fully next week, say, go into all the world, baptizing and teaching people the ways of love. Go. Enter Wendell Berry. Did somebody say go? Thank you. Yeah. So, some people think children bother me. I didn't know anything happened until I heard you all laugh. Enter Wendell Berry. So, my friends, do something every day that doesn't compute. Love God. Love the world. Love someone who does not deserve it. Expect the end. Take risk. Be willing to love radically. Even though it doesn't compute, be joyful. Practice resurrection. Practice resurrection, which simply means do not be afraid. Be willing to take risk of love every day, no matter what the cost. Practice resurrection. Be willing to risk in love, no matter what the cost. Go. Live. Love, no matter what. It was a terrible scene. We've all seen similar images. A crowd of protesters, maybe a shooting, maybe somebody yelling something, other people yelling something else, somebody who seems to be the enemy thrown to the ground, and people are hitting and kicking and trying to beat the man. Someone has yelled, kill him. And suddenly, 18-year-old Keisha Thomas, still in high school at the time, threw herself on top of a man she did not know in order to protect him from the crowd. Says Keisha, when he went to the ground, it was like two angels grabbed a hold of me and put me on top of him. Mark Bruner, a student photographer, was there that day taking pictures. He says, when interviewed by Ms. Wynn in 2013, that what was significant to him about the event was who Keisha saved. He said, she saved a man who, in my opinion, would not have done the same thing for her were the situation reversed. Who does that sort of thing in this world? Here's some images. Keisha is on the far left. You can't really see her very well in this picture, but this is a part of the anti-KKK crowd. They threw the man to the ground, and here's Keisha pushing everybody away, trying to protect the man, putting herself on top of him, telling people to get off of him, and finally, on top of him, offering herself in protection for a man she didn't know, whom she'd never seen, and who seemed like he was against everything for which she stood. Go. Practice resurrection. Take the risk in love, no matter what the cost. And that first Easter, when God raised Jesus from the dead, it wasn't an atomic explosion of love. Rather, it was a mostly quiet, local movement of God's loving presence, raising one person from the dead. But that act of raising Jesus from the dead was the beginning of a new creation in God, sending out ripples of love. Keisha Thomas' actions on that day in 1996 sent out ripples of love into the world. We'd like for God's action to be some big explosive movement, but God's movement of love is much more like a drop of water sending out ripples in the pond. Draw the circle wide. Let God's love go out into the world, sending ripples of new possibilities of love into the lives of all people. Practice resurrection. Take the risk of loving, no matter what the cost. Draw the circle wide and wider and wider. Catherine Wynne, in writing her article, says that when Keisha Thomas threw herself on top of this man, she did so in part out of her religious faith, out of her trust in God. She also threw herself on top of the man because she said, I know what violence is like. I wish somebody would have stood up for me when I was in danger. She says her experience of violence was much different than this situation, but she says somebody needs to protect others because violence, hurting another person, is never right. We may ask, well, why did Catherine Wynne write about an incident that happened in 1996 in 2013, 17 years after it happened? Well, I suggest it's because the ripples of God's love and resurrection began going out. And shortly before this article appeared, the BBC had done a series of articles on kindness. And in response to the series of articles on kindness, Terry Gunderson, who now lives in Oaxaca, Mexico, sent an email to the BBC and said, your articles on kindness reminded me of a woman I respect so much. And she told them the story of Keisha Thomas. She said, in 1996, I was living in Iowa raising two daughters, two adopted biracial daughters. And when I heard her story and saw the picture of what she did, I was so moved. I've kept her picture. And still 20 years later, I look at it almost every day. When I look at her picture and think about what she did, I say to myself, if she could do something like that for that kind of man, I can be kind to anybody. She said, I've never met her, but she's an inspiration to me. I've been kinder since then. Ripples of new possibility, drawing the circle of love wider and wider. Both Mark Bruner, who took those pictures, and Miss Gunderson said they think of teenage Keisha Johnson often and what she did. According to Miss Wynn, Keisha says she doesn't think about it much. She says, I kind of left it behind. I don't want to be known for that, but that was the best I could do. I can always do better. Keisha, who now lives in Houston, Texas, says she tried to do something every day to break down racial stereotypes. Or she says no dramatic action, simple acts of kindness, a smile, an embrace, a word of encouragement, she says, will send forth the message of love in a powerful way. Mark Bruner, interviewed by Miss Wynn, was looking at the pictures he took and said, we'd all like to be a little bit like Keisha, wouldn't we? What she did, risking herself that day to protect that man. She took a chance, risking her own life for somebody she didn't even know. She didn't think about the consequences of her action. She just did the right thing. Every day, do something that won't compute. Love the Lord, love the world, love someone who doesn't deserve it. Laugh. Live as it's the end. Take risk in love. Practice resurrection.